one? These guys?
Yeah.
Looks like a very good screw. Where is that? In the room or
No, no, it's
downstairs?
in the auditorium. Right across from the I'm not sure of the date. I think they told me they changed from the 24th to I think the 14th, maybe earlier, not that long.
So how will we know that?
But you can ask them if, when they go out. You can ask them, obviously.
Where is it?
You want the sources?
Sorry,
Yeah. The class is in English, but the sources are from the source, so.
So mostly everything here is in Hebrew.
There are a few English events, Gaffney.
Where's Gaffney? Page 15.
Yeah.
Ah, this is, I have this. These two. No, this, oh, well, I think I'll do the one in December. That's not very interesting. Doesn't say where.
What?
Is it in this room or in the?
You can watch it online, or that.
I don't even need to come.
Watch it online, the BAC Battle of Gallery. I don't know which one, it just depends on
How many people they get?
So what do they do? Online you just go,
BAC.
you can watch it at any time.
No.
At the time it's going.
It's live.
Yeah.
I just saved a seat for you, but anybody take it. Is it a seat? Perfect. Is it next to a baby? Sure. I've got a nice wife, so I must say that I always know who's at the Shiur every week because it mentions everyone by name. He still doesn't know my name. I've told him a few times. No, it's not sad. It's about I'm just guessing. No, John was son's name?
Security?
My husband? Yeah, where you stay. Where do you just told me I'm over there. Helen. Helen. Oh my goodness, what a small world. I met somebody yesterday. I mean, I know somebody said she wants to introduce something. She invited you on Friday the 10th. How many people are there?
He's the son of Ramaro. Ramaro. A nephew of Rav Yosef Ben. A nephew.
How's your heat? So you know, it's all the people that you keep your chance. Yeah, do you keep talking? The one who's speaking tomorrow is excellent.
Okay, good afternoon, good evening. The topic of the Shiur is Shnayim Mikra. The obligation that every week or maybe every week to read the whole Parsha twice, to learn the whole Parsha twice, with the Mikra, the Psukim, the verses, and then to review it a third time with the Targum, the explanation. The reason why I chose to speak about Shnayim Mikra V'Echad Targum, to review the Parsha this week, is this is the time of year when maybe people who in the past have not been successful or have not tried, say now's the time, because now is the beginning of a new cycle, and always when there is a hischadsha, something new, people always try again to somehow accomplish. And even if someone told me last week, I was talking to him, Erev Shabbos, about doing Shnayim Mikra, he said to me, Fabricius, forget it, it's for following, I'm not going to do it. But he says, I'll start with Noach. So this is the time of year people start. Now, people do consider the mitzvah of Shnayim Mikra to be very difficult. I was talking to a Ben Yeshiva who takes learning very seriously, and he said to me, if I could change one halacha in the Torah, it would be doing Shnayim Mikra. And as a matter of fact, if you look at some of the Sevarim, they seem to question, why is it so many people are not makbid to do Shnayim Mikra? And we'll see in the Shiur, my father, words of my father, he says, there were Gaonim and Gedolim who didn't do Shnayim Mikra, and he tried to explain their Shita, even though my father remembered very clearly every Friday night, would sit down after the meal and go through the whole Parsha, Shnayim Mikra, twice with the Targum Unklis. But that being said, taking upon ourselves to learn every week a certain amount, or whether it's every day, whether we're speaking about the Chumash, or speaking in Tanakh, Halacha, Gemara, can be a little daunting. So I want to start first with a little divrei chizuk, a little word of encouragement, which really has nothing to do with the Shiur, but just to keep it in mind. As we grow older, we change. So I grew up in Chicago. I have to tell you that until I was 16 years old, I was a die-hard Cub fan. Okay? And it's 16, okay? And then, the truth is I remember speaking about, I knew the statistics, I knew everything that was going on, and one of the best things of being a Cub fan was it never disturbed my Chodesh Elul. Because by the time Chodesh Elul came around, they were never in contention in the 70s. And, so much a little bit in the 80s, and then once I moved out of Chicago, already in the mid-80s, that was it, I was done. That being said, there's something about being a sports fan when you're younger, somehow or another, it comes back to haunt you. And I have to tell you, I'm not sure if I'm embarrassed to say this, I went to bed somewhat early last night, 11:30, and I set my alarm for 4 o'clock in the morning. Okay, a quarter to four, I checked my phone. I got 2 messages from one daughter living in Eretz Yisrael, one son living in America. Is Abba up yet? I'm not exactly sure why I did this. I got out of bed, and I went to actually watch the game with 2 of my children, 2 of my boys who were already up watching the game. And it was, I don't know if anyone saw the game, heard about the game. If you haven't watched the baseball game in 30 years, it was a great game to watch. Okay, it was like 5-1, 5-3, 6-3, 6-6. I do want to tell you, though, that as they were beginning the 10th inning, I had to go to shul. I did go to shul. I actually missed the end of the game because I had to go to shul. But yeah, I could have gone, but this is my regular. This is my regular minyan. But however, why am I mentioning this? So as we all know, and I know, at least I know, that people in Chicago, not myself, because I'm a Litvak, but they always thought the reason why the Cubs could not win was because of the curse of the billy goat. Now, for those who don't know what the curse of the billy goat is, so in 1945, a certain person, I'll call him Meshuggah, tried to come into Wrigley Field with a goat, and they threw him out of Wrigley Field, and therefore he went ahead and he cursed the Chicago Cubs that they would never win. They would never win. So I never paid any attention to the curse of the billy goat. And the fact of the matter is, there were some crazy thing that happens over the years. I'm not going to get into it right now. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if anyone saw, there was a very cute picture that came across. Someone sent me a picture of a Kohen dressed as a Kohen throwing the Soyer Lazazel over the cliff with a cub hat, wearing a cub hat, say that's the end. That's the end of the goat. That's the end of the goat. However, sometimes we think that we can't accomplish something, and usually the only reason why we can't accomplish something because we don't think we can do it. In last week's parsha, when Cain and Hevel brought karbanos, and Hevel's korban was accepted and not Cain's, Cain was very upset. Now HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Cain, why are you upset? Im teitiv se'es. If you're good. What was HaKadosh Baruch Hu really telling Cain? And the Malbim points out that Cain, who was looking at the other animals, thought that just like the animals follow, what's innate. They don't have a ratzon. They have certain tendencies. He thought he was the same way, and therefore he felt he wasn't able to choose. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, human being is different in teitiv se'es. That if you really want to accomplish something, you want to be good, then you'll be good. If not, lepesach chatas roveitz. If not, you're basically stepping on the edge of sin. And that was a message for all of us that if we want to accomplish something, we can accomplish. And I'm not going to go ahead and, to make a prophecy and say if a team wants to win, they can win. But no one should ever say we're being held back by a curse or other reasons. Really, it's up to us that we can do it. And the same thing applies if someone wants to accomplish something in learning which takes a daily commitment or a weekly commitment. He has to realize that it's all in his hands. We speak about Shnayim Mikra. Before you begin, everyone has to realize, whether it's Shnayim Mikra or anything else, they are able to accomplish as long as they know that they can accomplish and they can succeed. Okay, so now we'll start the Shiur. The Gemara says, Maseches Brachas, Daf Chestam and Aleph, discussing Shnayim Mikra. Amar Rav Huna bar Yehuda Amar Rabbi Ami, La'olam yashlev adam parshos in Metzibur, a person should always. And the Gemara adds in the word always, la'olam. Gemara could have just said, yashlim adam. Why did the Gemara add the word la'olam in? What was the point of always? No matter what, no matter when, no matter where, no matter how old you are, how young you are, no matter what you know, la'olam. Shnai mikra v'targum, v'afilu ateres v'divon. And even atarot v'divon. What does atarot v'divon mean? So it's a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. So Rashi says that the words ataros v'divon have no targum, and therefore, since it has no targum, so you might think, okay, there's no explanation for it. It's just names, so therefore, I can get away with reading it just twice. It says no. In that situation, you have to read it 3 times. And Tosfos says, why ataros v'divon? He says because he asked on Rashi because it has no targum. There are so many psukim, so many verses the Torah could have used as the Gemara could use it as an example. They have no targum. They have no targum means an Aramaic explanation. They have no Aramaic explanation. The names of Ruvain, Shimon, other names. But why Atarat v'Divon? Atarat v'Divon because they might not have targum unkelis. They might not be something which was translated, explained by unkelis Hager, who lived in the time of the Tanoim, which is usually the accepted targum that we'll use. And let's say, for example, in the old times when they would go ahead and during the time when they read the Torah, they would actually recite the targum, which was similar to targum unkelis that they would do. They would use targum unkelis, but there is another targum, a targum Yerushalmi. And therefore, since there is a targum Yerushalmi, Gemara is telling us that on those psukim, you're supposed to use targum Yerushalmi. That's machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. Targum would be the same. I actually heard from my father that I once asked him, does this person have to learn Rashi every year? And he said that as long as you learn a perush that goes on almost every pasuk and it incorporates the words of Chazal, then it would be okay. That's what he explained. It'll be okay. Yeah.
But how do they differ? And they do.
Okay, so we have a concept that there's something, there's Shivim Tanel Torah, and sometimes there's 70 ways to look at a pasuk, different explanations, and we say, Elu ve'elu divra lekim chayim, everything is true, the different perspectives that are true. Okay, so now, the question is, why do we have to do Shnayim Mikra v'Targum? Why is it important? So here, you have Machlokes Rishonim. Source number 3 mentions a sheet of the Ravan. And the Ravan sheet is very important, even though I would say, Lamase, in terms of what we should do. We should not follow the Ravan, but people did. Ravan says Shnayim Mikra Vechatargum is not for everybody. Shnayim Mikra Vechatargum is for somebody who does not live in a place where he'll hear Kriyas HaTorah every week. Especially in the olden days, people would live out on farms, they would live in villages where there wasn't a minyan, and that's why the Shulchan Aruch speaks that a person has to make sure he goes to hear a minyan on Shabbos Zachar. So a Jew like that, since he is not hearing the Kriya every week, it's important that he reviews the Parsha twice with the Psukim and once with the Targum, in order to go ahead and to keep up with the tzibur that unfortunately he's not a part of. That's the reason for Shnayim Mikra Vechatargum. But it's only for somebody, the Ravan says, who is not with a tzibur, but someone who's with a tzibur, hears Kriyat Torah every single week, has to make sure that someone's with a tzibur, he hears Kriyat Torah, doesn't have to do Shnayim Mikra. But if you're not with a tzibur, or if 1 week you missed, then you have to reach Shnayim Mikra Vechatargum. We don't paskin this way. However, my father pointed out that all those Gedolim and Gaonim that did not do Shnayim Mikra must have held like the Shita of the Ravan. And the Ravan also points out, so where does Shnayim Mikra come from? He says, very interesting. He says, you know that we have an Aliyah, and maybe this started at some point, even in the time of Chazal in certain communities, so you have the Bal Koreh, the one who reads, and you have the one who gets the Aliyah, and then we know in the time of Chazal also, there was somebody who read the Targum. So therefore, for the person who's not in Shul, he's not in the Beit Knesset, so in order to replace those people, the two people who are reading the Aliyah, the Bal Koreh, the one who reads, and the one who gets the Aliyah, and the person who reads the Targum, we do Shnayim Mikra, the Echad, we do Shnayim Mikra Targum. So the Ghost Maimonides mentions this, and he actually has a question, and he will go. He has a question, and he doesn't accept it. Now, so the Gemara, if we go back to source number 1, promises that someone who reads Shnayim Mikra is a segula of marichun lo yamav ushnosav, long life. Someone learns the parsha every week with the Hebrew, and then with the Aramaic explanation, is promised by the Gemara, by the Talmud, long days and long life. All right? And it says not only, doesn't say just that you're given long life, but the reason to read the Torah twice and once with the Arabic explanation, Shnayim Mikra Vechatargum, is because with this you're promised long life. And we'd like to understand that why is this mitzvah a mitzvah which grants long life? Now what that means, how it works out, I don't know. But the Gemara certainly says that a person will be granted long life. So the Gemara continues, and the Gemara says that Rabbi Bar Abaye, so I guess he didn't want to spend every week learning the Parsha, every single week. He didn't want to spend every week learning the Parsha. So what did he do? He tried to find, 1 day a year, and he would just focus the whole day on learning the Torah. What would that day be? Erev Yom Kippur. The day before Yom Kippur. Why? Because the day before Yom Kippur, there are no classes going on, no shiurim. It's really a time when you can spend the day learning. So, by yourself. But then he heard that Erev Yom Kippur is the day to eat. So he wasn't given that time. And then he was also told that it's important when you do Shnayim Mikra, you have to do it with the congregation. Which means that, let's say, for example, this week is the second Parsha, Parshas Noach. I can learn Parshas Noach this week. But let's say I want to get a head start and learn Lech Lecha, Vayerech, Hayesara. I'm not allowed to do that. I have to do it with the tzibur itself. Now, and then the Gemara Talmud goes on. The Gemara says like this. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to his sons, he says, I want to tell you 3 important things. Number one, it's very important. You take into mind, you have to make sure every week you learn the portion of that week twice and do the Aramaic explanation once. That's one idea. Then the second idea he said, which is a technical thing, that when you go ahead and you shecht, you slaughter a bird, make sure in order to get all the blood out that you cut open the main veins, make sure you get all the blood out. That was the second idea. And the third idea he points out, he says, is that if you see an older person who, because they had a stroke or some sort of neurological disease, and he forgot a lot of what he learned, be very careful, still give him honor, still give him kavod. Okay? Why? Because just like when Moshe Rabbeinu broke the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, the two Luchot HaBrit, he didn't throw them out. He put them in the Aron HaKodesh. See, even something broken, you have to give respect to. So at the end of this year, I'd like to maybe, in a certain sense, connect all these three halachot, learning the portion, Shnai Mikra Vechatargum. The second halacha is about making sure you get rid of all the blood, and even going beyond what the halacha requires, the law requires. And number three, and the connection to being very careful about the honor to an older person. Okay, so now, we mentioned the reason to the Ravan why you have to review the parsha. The Trumat Hadeshin, in source number 4, so he himself mentions another reason. And he was very bothered. Why is it that people are so makpid, they're so careful in his day to reach Shnai and Mikra Chatargum when it comes to Shabbat? When it comes to the holidays, no one reviews the portion that we're going to read on the holiday. So Rosh Hashanah just passed, the New Year, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and you don't see people who, before they get to the Beit Knesset or that day, are reviewing the portion of that day. You read Rosh Hashanah, you read Yom Kippur, you read on Sukkot. So, first of all, he wants to suggest that maybe you should, because maybe the reason why you go ahead and you have to review the portion is so in case you get an aliyah, right? You'll know what you're reading. You'll know what you're reading. So he says, then he goes and he says, but it could be. The reason is that, and he says the reason is at the end that maybe, the reason is because since the tzibur is reading the whole Torah, we have an obligation to read the Torah by ourselves also. And this is a view which is echoed by the Sefer HaChinuch, and I would like to actually read the Sefer HaChinuch in source number 5. The Sefer HaChinuch, which is a book of, speaks about all the commandments. So he points out, V'achat min ha-mitzvot, v'hi'ikar v'yesod, shekul nishanos olav. So one of the mitzvos, and this is something which everything depends on, is the mitzvah limud Torah. Ki v'limud yoda ha'adam ha-mitzvos v'yakayim osan. Because when you learn Torah, so then you'll fulfill the mitzvos, and then You'll learn the mitzvahs, you'll makayim them. If a person does not learn Torah, does not learn the mitzvahs, how can he fulfill the mitzvahs? And therefore the chachamim, the rabbis, made an obligation that we have to go ahead and read every Shabbat, to read a portion in the Beit Knesset, in the shul, in the synagogue, from the Torah, in a place where people gather together. Why? La'orer Leiv ha'adon al divrei ha'Torah mitzvos v'chol shavua v'shvua ad sheyigmru kol ha'sefer. So the rabbis made a law that every week in the Beit Knesset we have to go ahead and we have to recite a portion of the Torah in order that we'll have an opportunity to go through the whole Torah. How long should it take? There was a custom which we have today of finishing in a year. There was a custom finishing in 3 years. But rabbis made an obligation that there has to be a continuous reading from week to week to week in order that at some point we can finish the whole Torah. Why? Because if we don't learn the whole Torah, we won't know what to do. And they Shamanu, Rov Yisrael Noagim Likroso Chol V'Shon Achas, and he says today the majority of Jews complete the whole Torah in 1 year. There were customs to complete it in 3 years. And then he goes on. And he says, and along with that obligation, there was an obligation from the Chachamim that the rabbis, that we have to learn, everyone individually in this house every week, whatever they read in that place. So if you live in a place where they finish the Torah every 3 years, you have to, every week, you have to learn what they recite in the Beit Knesset. And if you live in a place where they finish every year, you have to learn on your own the Torah every single year. Why? So in other words, he says in other words, because when he says because if you recite it on your own, then when you read it in the Beit Knesset, you'll understand it more. And based on that, a person should definitely try, even though it's not always possible, to try to finish it by the time Shabbat morning comes around, so you'll understand the Torah as they're reading it in the Beit Knesset. So according to the Sefer Chinuch, the reason for Shnayim Mikra, let's keep in mind, is in order to enable us to learn the whole Torah. And if we're learning about Shnayim Mikra, and we're Mekayim the mitzvah of Shnayim Mikra, it's important to understand the point of Shnayim Mikra is to really learn the whole Torah. Okay, now, it's very difficult to learn the whole Torah. It's very difficult. Who can learn the whole Torah? There's so many secrets, there's so many things that are hidden, but a person has to strive to try to learn the whole Torah, and at the very least, Torah Shebechsav, we should go ahead and he says we should go ahead and we should try. So now, why is that? In other words, so now let's try and understand. So is that so important? Does that mean that we are going to head, and because we do that, we're going to be promised arichas yamim, long life? The answer is, I think it's if a person respects every letter, every nuance, every verse, every law in the Torah, that in itself brings long life. And why should I say that? Because we'll see a Gemara, the Talmud says, that when a person goes ahead and he doesn't respect, and for whatever reason he ignores a certain part of the Torah. Let's say, for example, he says, this pasuk, it doesn't make any sense, and he moves on. Or he says, this Gemara, this law, it's not applicable, there's nothing to learn from it. So we'll see that in itself can actually shorten a person's life. What that means, I don't know, but that's what the Gemara points out. The Gemara says, Maseches Sanhedrin, and source number 11, Daf Tzadik Test on the base. The Gemara talks about Menashe ben Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu was one of the kings of the Jews. He was a very big tzaddik, very righteous. He did a lot for the Jewish people, and not only a lot for the Jewish people, he encouraged a lot of learning that people in all of Israel understood and knew even the hardest parts of the Torah. His son Menashe was a different story. And his son Menashe would sometimes give a shiur, and sometimes he would make fun of some of the verses in the Torah. So for example, I'll give an example. Gemara mentions a few, but one example. Pasuk tells us that Reuven, the son of Levi, went to go ahead and he found mandrakes in the field, and he brought it home, and Rachel wanted some of the mandrakes, and Leah didn't want Rachel to take it, and Menashe says, this is ridiculous. Why does the Torah speak about this? It's ridiculous. Why does the Torah speak about this? And the fact is, if you want to see, there are many very, very nice ideas. Rav Eliyahu Kitov actually has a very beautiful idea. That what's the idea of the Dudaim? But he says, but Menashe ignored it. According to, just very quickly, he says, the story seems so petty. He brings home mandrakes, and there's a fight between Rachel and Leah. Why is the Torah telling us? And this is what he did. If he saw any portion of the Torah that he felt did not make sense, he wouldn't try to understand it. He would just denigrate it. It doesn't make any sense. That's what the Gemara says. The fact is that Rav Eliyahu Kitov, and I'm sure there are also some very deep ideas, so he points out, Rav Eliyahu Kitov wrote the Sefer Toda'ah, he points out in his Sefer on Chumash, he says, what's the idea? The idea is, very quickly, says that Reuven, Rachel, Leah, our matriarchs, they raised all the children together. Even though Rachel, Leah had her children, Rachel had her children, Rachel still had a hand. They were living together. And, we were told that when Reuven came and he brought the Dudaim, the mandrakes, so Leah got concerned that maybe he stole the mandrakes and took them from a certain field. And Leah, so Reuven said to Leah, no, he said, I took in the field that was Hefker. And Leah says, wow, look at that. I'm so proud. I have such nachas. I'm so proud of my son who was a young child, is so concerned about stealing one of Eva's fields. So Rachel, who also had somewhat of a hand, because inspiration came from her also wanted to have nachas, joy. And Leah said, it's enough you took my husband. You also want to go ahead and you want to have, you want to take away the nachas. You want to claim credit for how my children are growing up. And at that point, Rachel realized that the most important thing to Leah was to have Yaakov for herself, or have more of Yaakov. And for Rachel, the most important thing was to have children. And that's why she took nachas in what Reuven did, because she wanted to have children, so she wanted to have some nachas. It says, and because of that, Rachel was able to have 2 children, but not only that, Rachel was buried in a place where all the Jews would come daven to her, and yet Leah was buried next to Yaakov Avinu. So very quickly you see a very deep idea. But what happened, Menashe? He would go ahead and he would say, what's the point of this pasuk? It's ridiculous. He says, a batskol, a voice from heaven came out. He says, this is what you do. So he says, so the Torah says that, you're not going to realize, you're going to start denigrating more and more and more of the Torah. And the punishment for this, the point of the Gemara, is a person like this is chayav kares, which we know is sometimes life is shortened. So when a person denigrates or recognizes that, or feels that, or expresses that there's something in the Torah which does not make any sense, Chazal tell us that could shorten a person's life. And therefore, when a person is machshiv, which means he points out that every word of Torah is important, yes, that brings long life and that brings years. And that's why the Gemara says in Masechet Brachot that a person should learn Shnayim Mikra V'Chatargum. Because why? Because when a person learns the whole Torah, Shnayim Mikra V'Chatargum, or at least he tries, and maybe something happens that he can't, but he tries. What he's trying to say is that every word of the Torah is important. And by the way, a person who has a goal somehow to finish Shas, to finish Navi, to finish Halacha, whatever it is, he wants to finish certain things, and he's saying is every single word is important, and that's what gives Arichas Yamim V'Shanim. The title of the Shiur was to replace the crown to the Torah, because when a person learns Shnayim Mikra, so he's returning because he's showing that every single word of the Torah is important. As a matter of fact, so we mentioned before the argument between Rashi and Tosfot, that when the Gemara says that a person, has to do Shnayim Rechav Targum, even Ateret V'Divon, why? What's so special Ateret V'Divon? So Rashi says Ateret V'Divon has no Targum. So you still have to read it in the Hebrew 3 times. Tosfot says, no. He says because Ateret V'Divon have a different Targum. So it's telling us that when it comes to words that don't have the regular Aramaic explanation in, Targum Umkelis, you have to read something else. So the Taz, in source number 6, asks the question that Tosfos' question, Sheila, is a very strong question. In other words, according to Rashi, that the point is that it's telling us even though Ateret V'Divon doesn't have a Targum Umkelis, you have to read it 3 times in the Psukim. Why didn't the Gemara just give us an example of Ruvain Shimon? Why Ateret V'Divon? Choose a pasuk that doesn't have any Aramaic explanation. Targum Umkelis, Targum Yerushalmi. So the Taz says the reason is like this: that Rashi is saying that when it comes to Ruvain and Shimon, there a person can clearly understand that there's a reason to read it 3 times. Why? Because Reuven and Shimon were names that were given by Jews, and obviously there was some deep meaning in there. So even though there's no Targum Umkelis on Reuven and Shimon, when you hear the word Reuven and Shimon, you might try to think and say, what does the word Reuven mean? What does the word Shimon mean? It's obvious to a person that you have to read those psukim, because there's something very deep, there's something going on, there's something you can understand, like any Jewish name. However, Ateret V'Divon were names of cities in the land of Israel. And it could be that those names were given by pagans. So you might think, why should I repeat those names? There's no secrets, there's no lessons. So there's no Targum. Read it twice. Maybe don't read it at all. There's nothing to learn. It says no. To read it 3 times. Why? Because every word in the Torah, even something which is given through a pagan name, has a certain idea. And we don't, we have to think, and maybe somehow something. We'll understand. There are a number of words in the Torah. For example, word when it comes to the totafos, the tefillin. So we're told totafos means you have to have 4 small boxes in your shel rosh. How come? Because the word tat means 2 in one. Tat in one language means 2, and fat in another in African means 2. So because of that, totafos means 4, and your tefillin shel rosh, the tefillin on top of your head, has to have 4 compartments. So the Shlah asks the question. He says, what is a word from 2 different languages doing in the Torah? So he explains this week's parsha that we know that until the time of the Migdal Bavel, till the time of the dispersion, till the Tower of Babel, the people spoke one language. And then God scattered them with different languages. But what was the first language? Lashon HaKodesh, Hebrew, the holy tongue. So therefore, all the languages were based on Lashon HaKodesh. And for that reason, some of the words that we have were lost. And they can be found in other languages. So therefore, even though tat is a meaning, it means two in one language, it's also part of Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue. And for the same reason, every single word is important. Even our Torah V'divon, a name which was given by pagans to the cities in the land of Israel, are important. And we can't ignore any word. And that's the idea. Even read it 3 times, because you never know what the meaning is. Now, the Taz in source number 7, so a person l'chachila should try. The best thing is to learn the Chumash with Onkelos and with Rashi. Why? So, Taz says that number 1, because the Onkelos Aramaic explanation, which we'll speak about in a minute, was given in Har Sinai. Why was it given in Har Sinai? We'll come to that. And Rashi, because it explains the psukim, the verses, much more. And for that reason, a person should go ahead and should try to do both. What's the idea? In other words, every single nuance is important. Onkelos is important. Why is it important? The Aramaic? Because that's the way it was said at Sinai, at Har Sinai. So it's important. And Rashi is important because Rashi explains more. Every single idea, every diktuk is very important. So he says now, the Taz mentions at the end that, and I mentioned before, that let's say, for example, someone wants to read the Targum, the explanation in English. Let's say Taz didn't speak about English. He wants to read it in English. So the Taz mentions that you should not read it in English unless you don't understand. He's talking about Yiddish. You should read it in Hebrew, the explanation. But again, if someone does not understand the Hebrew explanation, of course he can do it in English, as long as my father pointed out, it incorporates the words of Chazal, of the rabbis. Now, the Pri Megadim, source number 8, asks why twice? Why twice do you do it? Is it to read the psukim, the verses twice, and why once with the Targum Aramaic explanation? He says, because the Jewish people were told the Torah twice. Once at Har Sinai, and then at the Ol HaMoed. And then in Sefer Devarim, the last book of the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, they were explained. So therefore, we go ahead and we read it twice to symbolize, to remember the 2 times the Torah was told over, and once to symbolize when Moshe Rabbeinu went ahead and reviewed the Torah and explained it very well. Again, what's the idea? The idea is that we have to try to understand that everything was given over. Every word Moshe gave, whether it was the first time, whether it was the second time, whether it was in Sefer Devarim, when he went ahead and he was speaking about, whether when it was in Sefer Devarim, when he was going ahead and he was explaining it. Every single word is important, and that is Shnayim Mikra, V'Echa Targum. Now, just to digress, so we saw before, the Taz says, why is the Aramaic explanation of Onkelos important? Because that's the way it was given over at Har Sinai. What does that mean? How do we know it was given over to Har Sinai? So the Gemara Maseches Megillah, source number 9, points out that Targum Shel Torah, the Aramaic explanation, was written down by Onkelos. Who was Onkelos? Onkelos was a nephew of one of the Roman emperors. He converted to Judaism, and he wrote the Targum Onkelos. So the Gemara asks, he wrote the Targum Onkelos? The Targum Onkelos, the explanation of Onkelos in Aramaic, was given over to Har Sinai. And the Gemara says, because it says, Vayikru b'sefer Elokim, Torah Elokim, Mefurash, V'shum Seich V'inu Mikra. So he says, what's Mefurash? Zet Targum. It was given over. So Gemara points out that what does it mean? Targum was set over. It says, so in other words, they heard the Targum, they forgot it, and he reminded them the Targum in Aramaic. So why was the Torah given over in Aramaic? So if you look at source number 10, the Marsha, it's fascinating. He says, the Ramah says the Targum, he says, is Lashon Aramis, is Aramaic. And the Torah was definitely said over in Lashon HaKodesh, in Hebrew. How could you not say over the Torah in Lashon HaKodesh Hebrew, which was the Lashon of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? He says, but when they explained it at Sinai, it was explained with Targum. Why? Because the Jews knew Targum, they knew Aramaic. How did the Jews know Aramaic? They knew Aramaic because that's what they spoke in Lavan's house. In Lavan's house, they knew Aramaic, so therefore the Shvatim, the sons of Yaakov, heard Aramaic, and therefore that became, in a certain sense, part of their mother tongue. And for that reason, at Har Sinai, when the Torah was told over, it was told over in Lashon HaKodesh, but then explanation was given in Aramaic and Aramit. And for that reason, when the Jewish people forgot the Aramit, because during the time of the first temple, when they lived in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, they spoke only Lashon HaKodesh, only Ivrit. He says, later on, the Maharsha says, Onkelos went ahead, and he says, they forgot, in the time of the second Beit HaMikdash, they forgot it, and then Onkelos went ahead and reminded them of the Aramaic. But why? If the whole reason for Aramaic was because that's what they learned in Lavan's house, why was it necessary to go ahead and to teach the Jews in Aramaic? They knew the explanation already in Lashon HaKodesh in Hebrew. So why did they have to remember the Aramaic? And the reason is very simple. Because since that's which was given at Har Sinai, every word is important. Just want to mention. So the fact is that there are only two languages, I get myself in trouble for this, that are Lashon HaKodesh. There is Lashon HaKodesh, that we know the Torah is written in, and Aramaic. There are other languages that might be beautiful languages that maybe we taught Torah for in hundreds of years, and maybe it reminds you of a Masorah. But the fact is that, to say, I don't know, I want to say is, Yiddish might have some aspect of Lashon HaKodesh, but it's not Lashon HaKodesh. Aramaic Lashon HaKodesh was given over to Har Sinai. That's the reason why it's Lashon HaKodesh. But then, and even Ezra points out that Aramit and Lashon HaKodesh are sister languages. But those are Lashon HaKodesh. So even though the Jews forgot the Aramit, Onkelos decided to go ahead and to remind them. Why? Because since that's the way it was given in Har Sinai, even the Aramit, just hearing the Perush in Lashon HaKodesh was enough. You had to hear the way it was given in Har Sinai. Why? Because everything that was given over at Har Sinai was very, very important. And now, as a matter of fact, as I pointed out, and this is why we're given for learning Shnai Mikra Targum, we're promised Arichos Yomim V'Shanim. Why? Because when a person goes ahead and he learns the whole Torah, he's saying every word of Torah is important. I didn't mention before, but this idea, just the contrast of how terrible it is to forget a part of Torah, is mentioned in Pirkei Avot, Mishnayot Avot, source number 14. Rabbi Dustoi v'Rabbi Yanai Mishra Meir Omer, Kol hashocheach davar echad mishnaso. Anyone who forgets one part of his learning, malav akasiv ki'ilu mischayev benafsho. So the pasuk considers it as if he's responsible for his own life. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, rak hishamar lecho shmor nafshecha ma'od. You should be very careful for your own life. Pentishkach es hadavar mesharo einecha, that you shouldn't forget anything that your eyes saw. That you have to remember every word of Torah. Yachol afilu tachvelav mishnaso. Let's say you didn't try to forget Torah. You worked hard to remember, but you don't have the best memory. In that situation, you're not obligated for your life, because you're only obligated if you do something to cause it to be removed, which maybe is you don't think it's important. Why do I have to review that for? That's not so important. It's very important to realize how chashuv, how priceless every word of Torah is. And when a person forgets that, that's when he's responsible for his life. And he says, the Tosfos Yontif points out in the second half of source number 14, when are you obligated? If because of atzlus, laziness, you don't want to spend time. Why? Because it's not so important. And then he goes on and talks about someone who's trying to make a living. But let's just say, if you don't think it's important, if you think it's important, that's great. You don't think it's important, that's when a person will be obligated it will be obligated in Shnai, that's when a person would be responsible for his own life. Now, before I conclude the Shiur, one point is a man, it's clear, has to learn the Parsha twice and once in the Targum. Is a lady chayiv to learn the Parsha Shnai Migrech Targum? So, Lemaisa, someone would ask me, halacha, psak halacha? Answer is no. They want to do it, it's a great idea. However, if you look at source number 16, the Magen Avram says, he says like this, that a lady is obligated to hear the Kriyas HaTorah. Okay? And by the way, so he saw the Sefer HaChinuch points out the obligation is at Sibur to hear the Kriya, the whole Torah, to learn the whole Torah. The Magen Avram says that if a lady can make it to Shul, she has an obligation to hear the Torah also. He says, and even though a woman, according to the Torah, is not obligated to learn, he says, however, they have an obligation to hear the whole Torah. Just like every 7 years when the Melech, the king of Israel, gathers all the Jews in the Beit HaMikdash and Chag HaSukkot, and the men, women, and children have to come. The men come to learn, women come to hear, women should come to hear Kriyas HaTorah, should come to hear Kriyas HaTorah also. And what's his proof? His proof is because the Gemara Megillah says that really anyone can get an aliyah to the Torah, but a lady should not get because of kavod habriot. Rabbanan said it would not be respectful for a lady to get an aliyah for the Torah, and therefore they're not supposed to get aliyot. So Magen Avram says, if you would think that they could get, even though they don't, so they must be obligated to hear the whole Torah. Why? Because again, I think the idea is because when you hear the whole Torah, you're emphasizing that the whole Torah is important. And man, woman, or children have an obligation always to emphasize that the whole Torah is important. And I just want to finish off one point. And that's why I think the Gemara started off and says, L'olam. No matter where a person finds himself in life, he's just starting off to learn. He has learned his whole life. And he knows so much Torah. L'olam yashlam adam, because every single person has an obligation to show that every letter, every word, every mitzvah of the Torah is important. And not only that, if you do it, you'll be promised long life, and then you'll have more an opportunity to show that the Torah is important. And I want to finish off with source number 13. It's actually fascinating that I always had a very difficult time. I didn't understand. Chassidus, this is only 3 years ago, I really started learning Chassidus, to show that Chassidus is important also. And it's all part of Torah. And if I wouldn't have started learning Chassidus, I would not understand source number 13. But source number 13, as I asked at the beginning, the Gemara said that Yeshua ben Levi told the sons, I want to give you advice, 3 things that are important. Number 1, I want you to learn the Parsha every week, Shnai Migrech Targum. Number 2, when you cut the veins, when you slaughter a bird, make sure that you cut the veins in the way where all the blood goes out. Even if for some reason it's still halachically okay without it, make sure you cut the veins in the way where all the blood goes out. And number 3, if you know a rabbi, someone, a Talmud Chacham, a scholar, I should say, who was very knowledgeable, and everyone used to go speak to him, but because he suffered a stroke, he has some sort of neurological condition, he forgot his learning, he can't express himself. You have to give him the respect that he always deserved. And what is the connection between all these 3 halachos, the advice that he gave, that he grouped together? And the Chassam Sofer says, in source number 13, he says that a person has to understand that when something is, let's say, somewhere, kedusha or tuma, holiness or impurity takes over something, it's very difficult to get it all out. And it's always there on some level. And therefore he says a person has to go ahead and has to learn Shnai Migrech Targum. Because you might think, what's the point of Targum, of Aramaic? How many people really go ahead and they learn Aramaic, they understand everything that's going on? He says you have to know that inside Aramaic, since the Torah is given in Aramaic, the Aramaic still has a certain kedusha. And I just want to quote his words. And what does he say? He says like this. He says The Targum, the Aramaic explanation, is klipas noga. Klipas noga. What is klipas noga? Not exactly sure myself, but the way I understand it is like this: that in the soul of a person is klipas noga, which has something good and has something bad, and we have to use it for good, as it explains. So therefore, he says that what happened was that the Targum, inside the Targum, once the luchos were broken, okay, he says once the luchos were broken, so something that you should know, then klipas noga has good. So the klipas noga is inside the Targum Onkelos, and the klipas noga is inside the shivrei luchos. But even though something happened, that let's say, for example, when the luchos were broken, it lost the kedusha still remains. And therefore, you have to go ahead and you have to keep the broken part of the luchos in the Aron Kodesh, because there's still some kedusha in there. He says, and the same thing when it comes to an older person, a scholar, who can't express himself, maybe forgot his learning, he was once very holy, there's certain holiness there, and you have to give him the respect. And he talks about the blood. He says, the blood, and the reason why we as Jews have to get rid of the blood is because the blood symbolizes certain things that are good. We sprinkle the dam on the altar. Also, the blood was something which was given for paganism. We have to try to get rid of all the blood because there's still something bad in the blood. He says, and we have to try to get rid of it. Even if halachically, according to law, is no problem of eating it, try to get as much blood out as possible because there's still something that remains there. And the same thing when it comes to Targum Onkelos. Why Shnai Mikra Targum? You might have learned it. You might have learned the Onkelos, the Targum. You might not even understand the Aramaic fully. But there's still some kedusha in there that you can get out. And the point of Shnai Mikra is to learn the whole Torah, review the whole Torah. And learn all the time. Why? Because every time we try to learn every word, every letter of Torah, we at least try. What we're showing is that every word, every aspect, every kedusha, every breath of Torah is kadosh. And that's our job. And that brings arichot yom b'shanim, a long life. And we show that every aspect, every mitzvah, every law is Torah. That's why the title of the Shiur was Shnai Mikra Targum, placing the crown in the Torah. The way to place the crown in the Torah, the only way, is to show that every letter is important. Every word, every idea, as long as it's true, it's important. And a person who by thoughts and feelings, intentions, and actions shows that every letter, every word of the Torah is important, he really returns the crown to the Torah. Yeah.
One like the modern day says, like your uncle's favorite Kamesh Kashon, that's a beautiful favorite. Rabbi Sachs's newsletter, Covenant Conversation, Rabbi Levin Machine's articles, or Rabbi Moshe Levin's researches, they're also in a beautiful way to understand. Is that also, can that be used in...
Listen, I think like this.
It takes time.
As I say, in other words, a person can say, let's say like this. I think my grandfather Moshe Soloveichik says, there's a concept that says, Eilu ve'eilu divrei Elokim Chayim. So what does that mean? So that means that if I hear somebody tell me something, and in my mind, he's telling me a chiddush that I think is ridiculous, that it's different words of the living God. So my grandfather said that after a time of the Rishonim, it's divrei Elokim Chayim. And therefore, if you know a Rishon who's accepted, and he says something and you don't understand it, you have to explain it. There was once, my father told me the story that in Baloshin Yeshiva, so Rav Chayim, I don't even remember, I forgot, I remember I heard it in Shiur, but there was a Rambam, that a Rambam said something, and then the Chacham Ilunil sent him a Shaila, and the Rambam changed his mind, and Rav Chayim gave a Shiur trying to understand the Rambam's first opinion. So in Volozhin, they asked Reb Chaim, I don't understand why you explained the Rambam's first opinion. The Rambam changed his mind. So he says, what do you think? He says, if there's a machlokas, the Rambam and the Ramban, and I have to explain the Ramban's opinion, so here is the machlokas, Rambam and Rambam, two opinions and monotheism, I have to explain it. So through the time Rishonim, everything is different, and even if you can't learn everything, you can't. So therefore, as I say, today, anything that a person learns, if it's Torah, he's being mashiv, it's okay. Problem the person says, listen, I'm learning this, I don't have time for this. I can't learn everything. I want to focus on learning Shas. I can't learn right now the Maral, right? or the morale is important, but or let's say I can't learn now the Beis Yosef. I'm learning something else. That's okay. You can't do everything. A person has to try to understand every word of Torah is important to see what they can do. In terms of Shnai Mikra is still a halacha, and therefore a person should try certainly to try to do every week the parsha twice and once for the Targum. Yeah. Taimani Shul's definitely do. We have changed that custom for Ashkenazim. So this, it could be. It's interesting. Maybe it does. I'm not exactly sure. There is an opinion that says we actually hold. I think that you have to read it twice yourself. There is an opinion that feels that if you hear it once, that's good enough. I'm not sure what the Taimanim do. Maybe if you read along with the Taimanim, you can go ahead and do it if you listen. I'm not sure. I've only heard. I've never davened Taimani Shul. Yeah, I never. Yeah. But yes. In general, I think it's accepted to do mikra targum. However, if you go ahead and you look, he says there's some. I think maybe the Chaznish who did mikra targum. Mikra, I'm not sure. I think and that is a question: do pasuk by pasuk, do parsha by parsha? What do you do? I think when it comes to that, right, a person has to do. He knows what's best for him. Someone once asked from Chaim Kanievsky about learning. He said a person should learn, what he's able to learn. The person to know. You can't superimpose something on somebody. But just because you can't learn something, you shouldn't be mavatel, denigrated. That's the most important thing. You shouldn't denigrate it. Okay? And like I mentioned it at a shiur, maybe 2-3 months. I forgot about what I said. That I happened to be davening in a Satmar Shtiblach once, and I saw a sefer the Satmar Rebbe, and I was waiting for Shemini Esrei to start. They didn't say here's a different hashkafa, and I do not opening the sefer. I opened the sefer, and I saw a great vart, and I got 3 speeches out of it, so I was very happy. Okay, yeah. So that's the idea. But the point is that we have to realize every word of Torah is important, and we have to go ahead and and that's why, for example, every word of Tanakh is important, and a person should try to learn Tanakh. And again, I'm not here to tell people what they have to learn, chas v'shalom. But we have to. The person has to try to know that his job is to learn as much as possible, and even when he doesn't learn, he has to know is extremely, extremely important. That's the idea. Okay. Myrav now, another room. It's not involved in the budget. It could be there. You should have put on film today, but all right. I think you should put on film tomorrow. You should. Yeah, Sunday too. You started Shiur on Sunday? Sunday, Monday, who's flying tonight? So I think once he gets the mirror, you should get on. What's it? You put on film on the airplane.
like to introduce myself. My name is Eli Hermy, Eliezer Hermy,
Uh-huh.
and my wife and I are the grandparents of Shmuel Siegel.
Really? Well, your granddaughter is his
Right, you put it
well, okay, fine. Very nice. I was actually, believe it or not, I was actually at that wedding.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was. Unfortunately, one of the disadvantages of making Aliyah is you miss family simchas. But that wedding, for 9 years, I happened to go to work as a Rosh Kollel in camp, and after I found out the wedding, I extended my trip by 1 day, so I was able to make the wedding. So that was very nice.
Glad you were able to.
I'm very close to. Shmuel, yes, when he stayed here, but also to my sister, his mother, Tova, because we were the youngest in the family, so we were very close. I'll send regards. Okay.
Okay, do that.
Actually, she sent me a message on today on the WhatsApp. Basel talked to me because the Cubs won. Because she knows I was a very big Cub fan back in the day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I haven't followed for a long time.
It's very nice meeting you.
Same here. You're visiting or you're living here? Very nice.
We're living here 1 month a year.
That's great. That's great.
And we visit the
It's
New
not
York.
enough, we agree, but, you know.
Visit the New York.
Okay, send my regards. How often do you see them?
Well, Shmuel and Leah, not as often as we should, but with FaceTime.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, little Avi knows who we are when he sees us.
So you're great grandparents, that means.
Yes.
Right. It's great. I just became a grandfather this past year. So.
Oh, Mazel Tov.
Yeah.
Very
So
nice.
Baruch Hashem. Thank God. Thank God. Anyway, thank you for coming over to me.
It's not a big question.
Yeah.
Do you know the Kurdim? They speak Aramaic. Is it close to?
I have no idea, but it could be it is. But the Kurdim, the Jewish Kurdim, I'm sure it must.
This is the only Eda that speaks Aramaic.
Yeah. Yeah. It could be. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm sure it probably is. I wouldn't know. I wonder if you can Google it and find out. Yeah.
טוב, תודה רבה.
בבקשה. Thank you.
שנה טובה.
שנה טובה.